Okay, now we should have audio. Testing, testing. Sorry about that. All right, let's start again. That was practice round. All right, who here is stabilized? Oh, how'd it go? No, I'm just kidding. All right, so what stabilizing is taking a material that otherwise might be difficult to work or unstable as far as cutting or turning or doing whatever you're going to do with it, and impregnating it with a resin to replace the air in it. So in terms of what we're going to talk about, it's wood. In Arizona, there's a lot of stabilized turquoise that jewelry makers use for like cabochons and stuff. And if you ever wondered how they always look so perfect, it's generally because they're stabilized, so then they can be machined and used on lapidary machines a little easier and things. So it can be used for a variety of things. They do have to be porous enough that air can be pulled out and resin can be pushed in, and they have to be non-oily. So like if you're using a really oily wood, you don't want to stabilize it. It just won't work right. So we typically do, for woods, we do a lot of maples, a lot of buckeye burl, box elder burl, things like that. They're really have no oil in them, and they stabilize really well, and they look really cool. Now, why would you stabilize it? Just for those reasons. Sometimes we get a really cool piece of wood in. These are kind of some examples. These are both box elder burls, and they look really great, but if I went to put this on the lathe, it'd probably crumble or fall apart, and I just wouldn't be able to use it. So by stabilizing it, I can make it not only usable, but really beautiful in the long run as far as polishing and finishing and things like that. And it really kind of ups the quality of it, in my opinion. We will talk about dyeing a little bit later, but what I want to do here, I'll pass around this little guy, and you'll see that this little chunk weighs more than this big chunk, quite a bit more, and it's because this one is stabilized. But you can see, especially on this side where the label is, how cool the burl looks with that stabilizing resin there, because it makes it harder and smoother. So if you guys want to pass those. So let's talk about a few things first. What do you need to stabilize? So you're going to need the equipment. You're going to need a stabilizing chamber. And there's a variety of chambers. I'm showing you on a Turntex chamber because these are the ones we sell. Curtis at Turntex, I had hoped he would be here because he kind of invented this chamber and this style of stabilizing. And he's probably the best there is at it. So you guys are getting a lesser lesson, if I'm being honest. But I do a lot of stabilizing. I probably stabilize more than Curtis at this point because I think he's out fishing and I'm stabilizing. So no, I'm just kidding. But we're going to show you on this Turntex chamber. We do sell them in a variety of sizes, and the size difference is basically for what you want to put in it. So a lot of times people will go, oh, I want that big chamber, but then you got to remember, you got to put enough resin in it to go over. So if you're doing a couple of pen blanks in that big chamber, you're going to have a lot of space to fill with resin. Whereas a small chamber like this, you can put pen blanks in it and fill it up relatively easy.
Could you put them in a cup?
The question is, can you put them in a cup? Yeah, watch.
And then stable, and then...
Oh, in the chamber.
Yeah.
Yes. You can. Now, that's something I used to do quite a bit in my chambers, especially in the bigger one. I would set a cup in. Now, you got to make sure it's tall enough because the idea is that you can remove it. But you still have to hold it down and all that, so it can get a little tricky. But you can do that, sure. And you can do that in other chambers because a lot of people use like stock pot chambers with glass tops or resin tops or whatever. And you can put cups in there and different things, but you don't want the resins to mix if you're doing colors or something, so there's some reasons you may or may not want to do that. But back to it, you need a chamber, you need a vacuum pump. There are a couple of kinds of vacuum pumps out there. You want an oil pump. There are, what's the other kind, Charles? Is it diaphragm or something like that? There's another kind of vacuum pump that doesn't work as well for this. It doesn't pull the vacuum as well. So you want an oil pump, and they are very common in like HVAC. So like in Arizona, there's probably a pump for every person at least, maybe more. But you do need a pump. And a chamber, you don't have to use this kind, but this is what I would recommend because they're very easy to use and very functional. You need your resin. So in our case, we use cactus juice. This is a gallon here with the hardener. And then if you're going to color it, you would need a dye. And you only want to use dyes that are compatible with the resin you're using. Some Alumilite dyes do work with cactus juice, but not all of them. So you want to make sure that whatever you're using is compatible. Now, there are optional things like this little guy here is a pump saver. Highly recommended, especially for the novice, because what this does is, anyone know what this does? It saves your pump. I mean, come on, right? Yeah. Now, this would go in line from your pump to your chamber, and should you overfill this and suck resin into the tube, it then drops into this chamber and doesn't go into your pump, because if resin goes into your pump, you get to buy a new pump, almost guaranteed, or at least rebuild a pump.
So are these little pump savers cheaper than the pumps?
These are like $60, which is a lot cheaper than a pump, so very good. Now I say beginners, but also experts should have them, because you know why? Because experts know everything. They don't ever mess up. Yeah, right? So pump saver is a good idea. It's not a big investment, but it's saving a big investment sometimes, because do you know what these eliminators go for?
I think that was 300.
Yeah, this is a really nice vacuum pump, probably at least $300. So I'd rather not rebuild it if I can just put this in line in case I make a mistake or I look away at the wrong time and suck some resin in. So a good idea. We do carry all this, plus they are available at Turntex. So that's kind of your equipment. It's fairly simple. There's not a lot of equipment. The main thing you're going to need is your materials and your resin. That's what you're going to keep buying over and over, because once you make it, you're going to keep stabilizing. So, all right. Let's talk about the process a little bit. When you're stabilizing, the other thing about this chamber is it's very convenient. So you've got the quick disconnect. The lid literally just sets on there. The reason it just sets on there and doesn't have to bolt down is because once this is turned on, we're sucking the air out of it. So it's literally pulling everything together. So once this is on, the lid stays on because we are pulling it all together. Now, the process is fairly simple for when you want to do this. And we'll talk in terms of pen blanks because I have some here. Basically, you're going to put your material into the chamber. He makes these cool little stoppers. You can use anything you want to stop it. I always used to use like sacks of marbles or rocks, but it's always a pain in the butt because then they're covered in the resin. Whereas this little thing, it kind of just wedges in the tank and then they don't fall out. And then you're going to pour in your resin. Now I'm going to use water because I'm going to give one of you this chamber and you probably don't want it full of resin. But you want to cover whatever you're stabilizing with the resin, in this case water, because you're going to be displacing the air from the wood and replacing it with water. So if you just have it filled to the top of your blank, when you go to pull all that air out and push the water in, you're not going to have enough and you're going to expose the wood to air. So you got to clear the space. And these are probably going to be really absorbing. So that's kind of an important thing. And think about this when we're drawing the air out. Think about like a sponge. If you take a dry sponge and you hold it underwater and you squeeze it, all that air comes out. And then when you let it go, all that water gets sucked in. And then when you take the sponge out, it's soaked, right? That's kind of what we're doing here. And that's a real like simple explanation of it, but it's kind of that process. I know Curtis, when he talks about it, he uses a lot of scientific terms. So I don't know those terms. All right. But one term I do know is let's talk vacuum. So we're going to pull vacuum on this. Perfect vacuum is 30 inches of mercury. It's 30 Hg. I don't know how Hg converts to inches of vacuum, but that's what it does. And that's at sea level. So we're like 1,100? 1,200? So we're like 1,200. I think the most we get on our pot next door is like 28 and a half. Sometimes it looks like it's touching 29. I don't know if it really is. So like 29 would be probably pretty perfect here. But the higher up in elevation, the less air there is, or the less air pressure is it. And so then you get less vacuum. So, you know, in Flagstaff at 7,000 feet, I don't know, you might get only 25, who knows. So it's going to depend on where you are, but you want to get the most you can for where you are, because that means you've pulled the most air out and replaced it with the most resin. So that's the ideal thing. So let's turn this on and kind of just show you a little bit here. So I've got the valve open. I'm going to turn on the pump. And I'll slowly close it, and you're going to see it looks like it's boiling. So the people at home can see. It's going to start to look like it's boiling. But that's not boiling, that's just air coming out of the wood. Now, you want to be very careful with this, and I'm slowly closing it because if this was resin, I don't want it to get up and hit my tube and then get sucked into my pump. I don't want the water to do that either. So I can slowly close it, leaving it slightly open, building up my vacuum, and you see it start to rise. Eventually, when I get fully open, it's going to rise and then it's going to start to drop. And that's because it's pulled the bulk of the air out, and there's less air moving is essentially all it is. But that's kind of cool, right? It looks like boiling water. But it's really just squeezing all those pieces of wood down and letting it all come out. It's kind of a cool process. Now, we will let's see if I have any tape. I'll just kind of hold it. We'll let this run for a minute. And see, I'm still not quite closed. What am I at here for? Can you read that? 28. Well, that's pretty good. So we're almost to probably our max. So we can try to close it all the way here and see if it goes up. Okay, see, so it didn't climb. So now we're on the decline, so to speak, where it's going to keep pulling air, but it's not going to keep rising. There's a real quick point where it just wants to go crazy at first, and you got to get past that, and then you can close it all the way and let it really build vacuum. Yeah, we're probably close to 28 there. But you can see how much air is in these blanks. These are box elder burl. And did everyone get to feel one of these? I mean, it's not like it's soft. You can't break it. It's not that light, but it's a light piece of wood. There's a lot of air in here. And this is kind of just showing you that's only like 5 pen blanks. So this is a really cool thing to see, especially before you do this if you've never done it, because that initial amount of air is kind of shocking sometimes depending on the wood. Now, other woods, you might not get this much air out of them at all. Some woods are much more dense and have far less air in them, so it depends on what you're doing. But what do you got to make sure your wood is not? Oily.
Have you tried stabilizing hemp? It's so chicky and
Yes. The question is, have you tried stabilizing hemp? We'll talk about hemp in just a minute, but yeah, absolutely. Now, one other thing I didn't mention before this is probably one of the most important things along with oily is your wood has to be perfectly dry. So this was dry, so I didn't say it with my mouth, but in my head I knew it was dry. But your wood has to be dry. And I don't mean it was sitting on my shelf for a year dry. I mean I put it in the oven and made sure it was dry. Because if you put wet wood in the resin, you guys remember what Zach said about resin and how much it likes water? Doesn't like water. It won't cure right. It'll be all wacky. Yeah, so you don't want wet wood. Charles, you had something to say? Was it dry? Yeah. So dry and oily are probably your two most important things. If you're ever not sure, go ahead and dry it a little more. If you're ever not sure if it'll work because it's oily, just do one little piece and see what happens. But you can usually tell an oily wood, like olive, cocobolo, what else? Ironwood is got a weird oil in it. Yeah, I usually dry it in an oven. And it doesn't take a lot, like 100 degrees for a couple hours. Usually, if it's been sitting on your shelf for years, usually that'll do it. If you don't have a good moisture meter, you can weigh it, put it in. If it doesn't change, it's dry. If it changes, it's dry. Write down the new weight, put it in a little more until it doesn't change, and then you know there's nothing leaving it, right? So that's one way you can dry if you don't have a good meter. And by good meter, I mean like, oh, we were going to talk about this. So I see I let all the vacuum out, and then I closed it back up, and it's boiling again. Boiling. So we know it's not full of, or we know it still has air. But let's kind of watch here. I'm going to put my finger right where the line is. And I may have just ruined my little demonstration here, but. So it'll start to go down. Now keep in mind, we ran the vacuum for like not even 5 minutes. Like this would probably take several hours for these blanks. So this is very much not even close to being done, but for the purposes of this and not running the pump through the whole demo, you guys kind of see that it's drawn down from my finger a little bit. I've gone where I vacuumed all day on something and I left it with, this much resin, and I left for the day and I come back the next day and it's down here. So overnight it just sucked it all in. And I went below the wood, so then I just redid the process because obviously it's going to suck more air in when it's exposed to air. So it's kind of a cool thing. One other thing we can do here. Now these are going to be crazy heavy compared to what they were because they're obviously full of water now, or not full, but much more full than they were. And they do weigh a lot. So I can still re-dry these and they'll be fine. But Curtis does this demonstration. He has this cool little block thing. And I think it has little legs so that it gets in the right spot. But let's try it with this. And what it does is it shows the displacement of the air from inside the cup. So what I'm going to do is push this in. Yep. All right, so let's push this down. I do not. The question was, do I use my wife's oven? I don't use anything at my house because luckily my shop is here at where I work, so nothing is at my house. Otherwise, I'd be in trouble a lot probably. So what you can see here, does everybody see that the air is clear down to here? You can see the water moving in the cup. So if this works right, and like I said, Curtis has a cool setup. I don't have that, so we're going to try it with this. I'm going to start with it open. And when I turn it on, you're going to see some big, ideally, some big pulls. See the water go up because it's pulling out some air here. And I might have too much air in there, I don't know. But look what happened to the water. It moved down. It was up here, and now it's moved down. Right? So let's close this off. So the whole cup is basically air. Can everybody see that? Now there again, we could let this sit and it's going to slowly pull that air out, but we'll just give it a sec here. Well, there's a big gulp. So now our water's right here in the cup. But let's see what happens. Everybody see where the water is? We're going to let the vacuum off. You see what happened? It went all the way up the cup. So imagine that being this, when it's under that resin and we've squeezed it, and as soon as we turn off that vacuum, it rushes in. So that's where the resin rushes into the material. Now, the question generally comes up, how long do I vacuum for? There is no answer because everything's different. Even the same species of wood would be different time frames. Some woods, we have a real big vacuum chamber next door that we do our stabilizing in. Some days we run it a couple hours. Some days we run it 10, 12 hours and it's still not done. So it depends on the wood, how big it is, how punky or whatever it is. But you run it as long as you need to get all the air out. So basically, remember all those little bubbles? You'd want to run it till there's no bubbles. And it's weird because probably the bulk, say 95% of the air is going to come out pretty quickly, and then it's just going to trickle out for hours on a lot of these. So it'll just be like bubble, 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 little tiny bubbles. But just turn it on and leave it. It's not a big deal. But you want to do that because the more air you get out, the better the piece will be. Now, just as important as that is the time you let it soak. So once I've vacuumed, and you want to keep track of it, say I vacuumed it for 4 hours. I want to let it sit with the vacuum off for at least double that, so 8 hours. Very important. And that's where we get that drawdown where it's sucking the resin into the wood. And that's how we really get it nice and full of resin. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Mike.
During that time period when you're off the vacuum,
Yeah.
would you add more resin?
The question was, when you're off the vacuum, can you add more resin, like pour it in?
Because it's dropping, right? It's
Yeah.
settling the wood.
Yeah, I suppose you could.
You said earlier that it dropped so low you had to do it again.
Yeah, once the vacuum is gone to where you could lift the lid off, I don't see why you couldn't add more. I probably wouldn't break the seal. Well, so generally, that's a good question. So generally, you would turn off your vacuum pump and leave it closed, right? And that'll kind of slowly let it creep in. And I think that does a better job than if you just turned off the nozzle and let all the air in. You'll get that initial swoop, but I don't think it'll fill as much as far as density. So it might take several hours before the lid will actually release enough vacuum just seeping over time. But then you could after that, yeah. But it's always best to have it enough. Now this one, if you're doing pen blanks, and you got a couple of inches, but you got to be real careful because it's a little shorter. But this chamber is perfect for pen blanks. That's why we have this one. But if you have a taller chamber, obviously you can put the same amount of resin, but you got a lot more to work with as far as your initial flows. And I'm telling you, sometimes it just goes crazy. So it's a little easier on something that's taller, but if you're doing pen blanks, this is a great size and cost effective. So it has to soak for at least double the amount of time it was under vacuum. Now, we're not done there. That's kind of like half the process. From there, we go into the oven. And the reason we do that is cactus juice cures by heat. So once I vacuum this, if I just let it sit around, it's just going to stay wet resin. We have to get it into the vacuum, and it's 190 degrees. I want to make sure it hasn't changed since he updated the formula. It says cure at 200 degrees for 2 to 3 hours or until cured. So 200 degrees. And what you want to make sure is you get that internal temp to 200 degrees, kind of like cooking a steak. However, once it starts to cure and you see crusting on the outside, generally that means the whole piece has hit that temp and it's going to cure. So usually you're safe when you get crust lines. Now, a lot of people, and this was kind of more in the past, I don't see it as much anymore, they would roll these in foil. And I think everyone thought that they were rolled in foil to keep the resin in, but it wasn't that at all. It was so that you could stack them and they would be separated. Because if you stack two pieces like this with resin and then you bake it, you got one piece. Because it ain't going to come apart unless you cut it apart. So by wrapping them in foil, you could stack them and it was easier in a smaller oven. I don't wrap anything because it's a pain to get the foil off and it's just not needed. I'll space them out kind of like this, and then I stack them in my oven, sometimes even like this, because that's such a little bit versus like the whole blank being set on top of each other. Usually I can knock them apart, or if I have to, cut them apart, whatever. But that way I can do more at once.
Maybe sticker it with some
Like a popsicle sticker. You probably could sticker it with a popsicle stick, yeah. So it's just a matter of, getting them in there. Now, if you can, let's say you can only fit 10 in and you've got 20 in here, leave the others in submerged under the resin. Don't take them out and let them drip out. Because the resin's not going to come rushing out of it. However, you probably will lose some, and there's no reason to risk it. So I would just leave them in the solution, the resin. But that's a very important step. If you ever turn one that you cured and it feels oily or wet for some reason, it didn't cure right. So it should feel dry to the touch. If it at all feels like there's any kind of wetness to it, it's not cured. So you definitely want to make sure that it's cured. Here, yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier, something about crusting.
Yeah.
That
Here's a couple if you want to pass them around. Yeah, so he said I mentioned about crusting. What I mean is, like in my oven, I have like a wire rack, like a baking rack. So these are sitting on that wire rack, and a lot of times I can flip them over, and the resin has crusted where the wire was, but it's cured resin. So it's just, I just mean I can see like that the resin cured, because otherwise, if it's flat like this, it's kind of hard to tell. And I do use a temp gun, like Zach was using in the resin casting, to see what the surface temp is, but that doesn't really tell me much as far as the inside. Now the other thing is this blank cures a lot faster than this blank. Anybody know why? Science. Yeah. Yeah. It takes it a lot longer to heat up this big piece than it does this little piece. So if you're curing these together, you want to watch, because by the time this one's done, this one's going to be real, real hot. And if you overheat it, you start to get curving and warping and things. So you don't want to just throw it in the oven and crank up the heat and ignore it. You got to keep an eye on it, and you want to cure it just hot enough to do the job, but not more. Yes, sir.
I remember that if you do cure it too hotly, that will make the resin leach out.
He said
Too high a temperature.
if you cure it at too high a temp, it can make the resin leach out. Oh, you've heard that? Or Curtis said that? Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, that makes sense, because it would essentially like heat it up and make it more viscous or less viscous, and then it would, yeah, it'd probably be easier to come out. That makes sense.
So you don't get a lot of leaching when you do it without the foil?
Nope, hardly any.
And you take it directly from the...
Yeah, so when I take mine out, I'll shake it out, you know, let all the drips stop dripping, and then I set it on a baking tray with the wire rack, let anything come off that I missed, and then I'll put it right in my oven on another tray.
You don't wipe them down?
I don't wipe them down, no. No, if there's anything on it, like on the surface, it'll kind of flash off pretty quick, because it's, you know, it steams out of the oven and stuff. So it comes off pretty quick. Yeah.
So do you sand
Good
them
questions.
to get those so pretty?
What was your question?
How do your blanks look so pretty? Do you sand them?
The question is, how do my blanks look so pretty? Well, thank you.
Mine did not look pretty when they came out.
These are sanded, yes. There's nothing on these other than sanding. Now, where the tape is for the label, you can kind of see what a finish would look like. But yeah, these are just sanded. Sometimes they'll be a little rough from the resin curing on the surface. So we just hit them on the sander real quick to like knock anything off. And it just makes them look better. But it kind of gives you a better idea of the material too. You can always look on the ends. That's a good indicator of how much your resin penetrated. If you're doing a pen for the first time, just cut off, you know, 1/2 inch if you don't think you'll need that, and that way you can see if it got all the way through. Especially if you're doing color, you can see that. Yeah. So, but the woods are really cool because of how they, you know, take or don't take resin and color. Because you can see this one, there's a lot of brown where the grains didn't let the resin flow through. Whatever they were dense enough that it stopped it. But that's kind of the beauty of what you get out of these. Like that purple one there has some really cool colors because it's got the spotting and the eyes. That's why we use burls a lot, because you get these eyes, you know, and it just makes it look really unique. It almost looks like a stone. And did everybody feel this, how heavy this is? I mean, it feels like a brick. And it probably weighed nothing. Yeah, because it had more air in it, and now it has more resin in it. But this, I mean, this is just off a sander probably at 220. So, I mean, you can imagine if you sanded this high grit and polished it, it's going to look real good. So it's kind of a really cool thing for that.
So how would you finish those?
The question is, how would you finish these? So depending on what you're making with it, you know, you'd probably determine the finish by that. Like these are kind of made for knife handles because they're kind of longer and flatter, although you could make pens out of them. So you would finish it based on the use. So, you know, if it had to take a lot of abuse, you might not use like a CA or something because it might crack. You might use an oil finish, but you can use just about any finish you like. A lot of people with pen blanks that are stabilized do a CA finish because that CA just makes it shine like crazy, and it looks really cool. So, but I do a lot of friction finish on stabilized, and it looks really good. And that's my preferred thing anyway. Yeah. Good question.
It's almost an acrylic.
Yeah, it's almost, you're kind of making like a hybrid blank in a sense. So,
I have one other question.
yes, sir.
The density of wood, so like the box elder burl and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Has to be light and more porous, but if you have something that's a little more solid, then does that, you need to adjust the time and everything like that it's in there?
Yeah, so the question was, based on the wood, do you adjust the time? Are you talking in the chamber or in the oven? Yeah, so.
Just in the chamber, because to get the resin in.
Yeah, so definitely. A wood that's more porous and less dense will take more time, and a denser, more solid piece will take less. Now, that being said, watch your oily woods. You don't want to put something in there that's oily, it just won't take the resin. Yeah, none of that. None of those rosewoods or anything. But you definitely will have some woods that are much, much quicker and some that take far longer. I mean, we've had woods that take 12, 13, 14 hours of under vacuum. So then they sit in there a whole day. But they're usually worth the work. And that's why these blanks cost what they do. So everybody always wonders, like, why is stabilizing expensive? Because, I mean, there's a lot of time and, you know, the resin, I think these are $89 a gallon. So, you know, if a blank takes 8 ounces, that's that much resin, plus the time and the equipment and whatever. So that's why when you see hybrids or you see stabilized blanks, especially multicolor stabilized blanks, there's a lot of time and effort in those, and people generally want to get out of it what they put in it. So it's a give and take, usually worth it. Good questions. Now, as far as curing the blanks in an oven, you can use a variety of types of ovens. I don't recommend the oven in your house because this will put off a smell. It's curing resin, so it's going to have an odor. It will also steam. So, you know, we're curing liquid and making it hard, so it will evaporate some steam. So we use a little lab oven that we got at an auction or something, and we put it outside. That way it doesn't stink up the whole shop. People often use toaster ovens, and you can get a toaster oven fairly inexpensively, either new or from a thrift store or whatever. I would not get a toaster oven at a thrift store. I tried it twice, both terrible. One almost caught on fire, one didn't work. So for the price of a toaster oven, just get one dedicated to this if you're going to do it. That being said, your elements are very close to each other and what's in the middle. So really, really, really watch it because you can catch it on fire real easy. And there have been people who've lost their houses and shops and stuff to this because they caught the wood on fire and no good. So do not do this and walk away. Be there the whole time.
Can you use a smoker?
You know, I have heard of people using a smoker. I've never done it, but I have seen that people do it. I would do it outside as well, though.
Time-wise in the oven versus time, like the time that it takes you to get the resin in the blank,
Mm-hmm.
does that also equate to the time to bake it?
The question is, does the time in the chamber relate somehow to the time in the oven?
Yes.
Not really. The time in the oven will always be much more similar from wood to wood, even though there might be some variation of the amount of time. But getting it up to temp, now there's going to be less resin in some woods than others, so it will vary because of that. But the oven time will always be a little closer than the wide range of vacuum time. So yeah, kind of just depends, but not as much variation, but some.
But like when you're going to a larger piece of wood though, the time in the oven is going to be longer to keep it up.
Yes. Now, the size of the blank in the oven will definitely change the time. So a pen blank might take 2 or 3 hours, where a big blank might take 5 or 6 or 7 hours. Absolutely. So that's more of a size thing than a wood type thing, but it definitely will affect it for sure. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay.
There's somebody in the chat that is saying that they have a smoker and it works really well for them.
Okay. Yeah, so I would just look on, YouTube or chat in the groups and see who's using it and kind of get advice. But number one thing, safety. Those toaster ovens can be dangerous if you aren't careful. And I don't know if Curtis still has it on Turntex, but he did it one time. There's these balls that you can put on top of an oven. Have you seen those? And they're like fire extinguisher balls. And if they get hit with flame, they burst and literally coat it with whatever it is. Did he put them in houses? I know that they used to use them a lot in houses. Yeah, and they put like fire retardant out. But I know it coats So, I mean, that might be a good idea if you're nervous about it, but I just wouldn't have it in my house or my garage. I'd put it out on the side yard or something because, one, it's going to stink up wherever it is, and two, don't risk a fire, please.
Deep frying turkeys, you don't wanna do.
Yeah, I mean, you're not deep frying a turkey in the front living room, right? I hope not. So, yeah. All right. So, that's kind of the basics. Now, let's talk a little bit about dyeing. So, essentially, everything we just said would be the same. However, we can add color. And color is a funny thing because it's kind of like resin casting. Like, there's no one way to do it, and there's no one color, and there's no, like, you know, whatever. But I'll tell you a couple of things that are kind of important. So, typically, you'll see mostly one color stuff because every time you do a color, the steps I just said about vacuuming, curing, and then sanding, whatever, you have to do that every time for each color. So if I did this in one color and it takes 6 hours, and I do it in 2 colors, then I'm talking 12 hours. And if I did it in 3 colors, I'm talking 18 hours, sometimes more. So that's where the time really starts to get eaten up. Plus, there's a couple other little tricky things. But with color, you always want to add a dye that's made for this. So like in cactus juice, you can use certain Alumilite dyes. I know you can't use white or black or any of the fluorescents, and it's because they have really heavy elements to them. And it has to disperse in the resin. So you can see these are really, really liquidy. The other thing is you really want your color in your, like I mix them up in the gallon before I mix it. You could put it in smaller things and do that, that's fine too. But you really want your color to be very dense and saturated in your resin. Because whatever it looks like in here, it's going to look less in your wood. So if you want a really bright purple like this, I mean, if I showed you the purple resin that I used, it looks like it's black because it's so dark in that jug. But this is what it comes out to, this like awesome purple. This probably looked really blue, but we were going for like a teal. So it wasn't dark blue, but it's that. Now the green came out really nice and green, but you always want it to look darker in the liquid than what you want because it'll always come out lighter. Reds, Scarlet Fire is kind of like an orangey red. But if you want a really red, I mean, you got to add a lot of red because otherwise it's going to come out pink, just like resin casting, right? So keep that in mind when you're doing it. You can mix up partial jugs, like if you put them in old water jugs or milk jugs, you can add colors to different ones. But keep in mind, you got to have your resin high enough to cover your material. So you're going to need quite a bit. So it's generally good to do like a color at a time. And then you can always pour back in what you don't use, clean out your chamber, and do a different color. So it's not like you have to get rid of it, but you do have to do that. So I think, I don't know, do we want to talk about multicolor stuff? So, yeah, go ahead, question, please.
I've noticed when I stabilize and I put a bunch of different types of wood in there, then like color leaches out and it makes my cactus juices kind of like brownish.
Yeah,
Can I
good
still
question.
use it, and can I pour it back in, or should I put it in
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, the question
I
was,
haven't ever added any colors.
the question was when she did her stabilizing, the wood kind of made the clear cactus juice brownish. Yeah, that'll definitely happen. That'll sometimes happen more if it's more moist, if there's moisture in it. So you want to make sure it's really dry. Another thing is, and I didn't mention this before, but you want to make sure that everything's really clean. You don't want dust on it or loose bark. You want to kind of chip off any bark, clean it, sand it, brush it, whatever. Make sure this is really clean because anything that's dirty on there, when you put it in there, see how that kind of looks dirty? And actually you can see on the bottom there's a bunch of dust because I didn't clean these. It's all going to get in your resin and then make it dirty or brown. Now, unless it's just oily, it'll probably work fine when it's brown, but it's not going to be clear like you want. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll run our clear for a couple cycles, and then even though we try to do everything we can to stop it from tinting, it'll still get a little discolored. Then we'll add it to like a dark color and add more dye because it doesn't matter that it's a little brown because we're turning it blue or whatever. Now you might not have that option if you're not doing as much stuff, so you might want to try to keep it separated, but you can separate it and make it a color at that point if it's not the color you want. But clear is a really cool color, but it is tricky because of that. So like here's this burl clear stabilized versus the same burl not. Did I already pass these around? Oh, okay. Yep. So you can see that they're slightly different tones. The clear does make it slightly darker, just kind of like an oil or something. But this is the stabilized and that's the not, so it's got a slightly different color, but not much. But if you put that in like a brown resin that's been used a few times, it'll definitely darken it. Now sometimes it looks cool. It almost looks like a gold dye, and I don't mind it so much, but it depends on what you're going for. So good question. Yes, question.
Is there a shelf life after you mix the resin with the activator?
Yeah, the question is there a shelf life after you've mixed the resin? Anybody know what it is? A year, yeah. I think it's a year.
But he will also tell you to try it.
Yeah, so I think Curtis says it's a year once you mix the activator. But if you have had it sitting around a long time, you got two things. Definitely try it. You can like pour a little in a cup and try to put it in the oven, see if it cures. We just had to get rid of some that we had sitting around too long. It just wouldn't cure right. It would kind of cure, but not all the way. And it's just not worth it because it's too much time and effort to like not have it cure. So if you're not sure, test it. But don't buy more than you can use unless you're sure you're going to use it. Like, don't buy 2 gallons if you might need a half gallon. Just get a half gallon, and if you need more, get it. Because if it sits around more than a few months, in my opinion, especially in Arizona where we have such swings in temperature, unless it's in a climate-controlled place, it's going to start to react differently, even though it's within that year. So just try to do your best to use what you get fairly quickly. Yeah, it's a good question. Was that the question? Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about multicolor dyeing. Now this is really kind of a weird topic because there's so many different ways to do this. And I'll kind of go through a couple of things that I've done over the years. And some of them work really great, but they're just terribly time consuming, and some of them don't work as well. But what you can do is think about the process. So, you know, this block, if we're going to stabilize it, it might be under vacuum for 5 or 6 hours, right? So if I put it in a color and I only vacuum it for 20 minutes, theoretically, I didn't get it all vacuumed, right? So I might have a couple of things. I might not have it go all the way through, especially on a bigger blank. I might not have it as saturated. I might not have it as many grains like well. So what I can do is vacuum it for less time, cure it, clean it up real good, you know, knock all the loose cured resin off, all that stuff, go through the whole process. And then I can put it in a different color and cure it, or stabilize it, not cure it, for a certain amount of time. And then I can cure it in the oven, repeat the whole process, and then I could go for a third one. Now, whatever your last one is, you're going to go the whole time, right? Because you want to make sure it's solid and good. The other thing is you almost need to sand every side every time because you're curing resin on the surface, and if you're blocking the grain, nothing's going to get in. So it's a lot of work. Some ways I've done it in the past is when I have a really good set of pieces that I know will travel through the grain real well, I'll put them in a tray and I'll kind of drip resin on them and let them kind of soak through. And you can usually see where they drip on the top and then they come out the bottom. So you know it went through. So that's good. And you can kind of just do that, and then you can cure it and sand it. And then you're not getting a lot, but you're getting some color. And probably some of the best blanks I've made were that way, but they're just so terribly time consuming. It's horrible. And then you can do another color, cure it, sand it, do another color. And then at the end, you can throw it in clear or whatever, you know, to kind of fill in. So there's a lot of ways you can do that. Most people do 2 or 3 colors because by the time you've done 3 colors, you're kind of sick of it and you just want it to be done. But it's a lot of work. So it's a give and take if you want to do that. Now, if you're doing it for stuff you're going to use, it's a lot more enjoyable because you can kind of make exactly what you want, and then you can make something cool out of it, and it's much more fun. If you're making it to sell blanks, it's a lot more work, and it's, you know, you don't get the payoff as much as you do from making the whole product. So multicolor stabilizing is kind of more, I've even heard Curtis say it, it's more of like art than like just a process, because you kind of got to figure out what works and what works with each resin and how you want it to look, and it doesn't always act like you want it to, so that's kind of a thing too. But it makes it more interesting and unique, that's for sure.
Would you start with a dark color first or a light color first?
Would I start with a dark color or a light color first? I don't know. I don't know that it would matter. I guess it depends which way you're doing it. If you're submerging the whole thing, probably a light color. But really, I think even more than the color is just the amount of time. Because the more you vacuum it, the more it's going to get in there and the more it's going to saturate it. And the less, the less. So, I mean, if you do it, you know, and if you have a chamber, try it out and see what you think and let me know. But that's what we've done last, right? That's what our last round was. I think we did red first and then blue. Do you remember? Yes. I think we did red first, short time. And you could tell they were still light when we were done curing them and everything. And then we did blue, and they came out really good. I mean, it almost looked like red, blue, and purple because where they kind of merged. So we got kind of a result we didn't expect, but it worked. So that's just it. There's not like a exact way to do it, but there's multiple ways, and it's kind of a fun thing, but kind of challenging. Yeah.
Wouldn't you start with like a prominent color? If you wanted most of the highlight of the main color?
Yeah, you could probably think of it that way. The question was, would you start with your most predominant color first? Probably, because you are going to soak like the easy stuff with that first. So if you wanted it mostly red, you might start with red. And then you might even do like, let's say you were going to do 3 colors. You could do like red, blue, green, and then go back to red for the final to like really make it predominant and just have little bits of red. But I mean, you're talking days, you know, like this isn't a quick thing. And that's why like hybrid blanks that are stabilized are so cool looking, but they're also expensive because like people spend days just making a blank and it's kind of a pain. But it really usually is worth the effort because you get really cool stuff that you can't get, you know, with one color or no color or whatever. So it's fun, but it definitely is a learning curve, and it's kind of like learning to paint and mix colors. You got to figure out what that is.
Another question?
Yes.
So like if I wanted to take 6 of these blanks and I want to make them super hot pink,
Yep.
and I don't want to, do I pour the cactus juice in there and then put the color inside the chamber and stir it up?
Okay.
Like, and how much dye do you think I would use for like
Yeah.
6 super hot pink blanks?
So the question was, to make hot pink blanks, do you put the juice in the chamber, add the dye, and then mix it up? So basically what I would do is mix the dye and the cactus juice first. So whether you're just, you know, if you're only doing 6 and you know, hey, they fit in this much, no problem, you could mix it up in that cup. That way you don't use your whole gallon.
Right.
And you could, if your chamber was big enough, you could set your cup down in there. The problem is you don't have any room above it, so that'd be your issue. With these chambers, it's easier just to put it in there. So what I would do is I'd mix up my cup of resin, and I would make it, if I wanted crazy hot pink, I would make it obscenely pink, like just hurt your eyes pink. I'd put my wood in. Imagine this is empty, right? So the beauty of this is I can empty it out. I can grab a paper towel, wipe this out in 30 seconds, and I'm ready to go again. I'd take my really dry blanks. This is like where you sing a song along with me. And my non-oily woods, and I'd stick them in here. And the cool thing is you can lock them down, because what's not as fun is putting this little lock in when there's a bunch of resin in it.
Yeah.
Right? When my hand is getting gooped in resin, or even my glove, because you'll be wearing a glove and then you'll realize that you went just past the lip and now it's all in your glove. But see, now it's fine. So I'd have my crazy hot pink here, and look at the difference. Remember we were talking about the brown?
Yeah.
From some dirty blank to clean blank? And then I'd fill it up just over. My other way at the bottom? Yeah. I'd fill it up a good inch over, and then I'd vacuum. So mix it in the cup or in the jug first before you do that. And if you can put your blanks in empty, that's the best. Now, if I had pink in here, because I just did pink and I wanted to do more pink, I probably wouldn't empty it out and put them. I'd probably put them in with a glove and then try to put it. But if I can start empty, it's always easier. Yeah, good question. All right. Any other questions on that? So,
Oh, I have another question. Do you really have to change out the oil in your pump every time? Really?
are you supposed to change the oil in your pump every time?
That's what I
Are you really?
But do you really?
Wait, what are you saying?
That's what the instructions say.
Yeah,
Well,
okay.
there's a lot of instructions out there. So the question was, do I really have to change out the pump every time, or the oil in the pump every time? And my response was, you have to change out the oil in your pump every time?
Check your manufacturer suggested.
No, they say.
A better question would be, do you ever change your oil in your pump? And the answer would be no. You do add oil occasionally, because has anyone run a vacuum pump and you kind of see this, like, it looks like smoke, but it's really like mist of oil. It's real gross. I think it somehow, I don't know how these work at all, just so you know. But I think somehow the oil is getting exhausted a little bit. So over time, if you use this a lot, you'll drop oil a tiny bit. You got to add it. But I am not aware of that. I would follow all manufacturers' recommendations on your pump, or buy the extended warranty.
Have you had any experience with like the one-way vacuum systems?
Have I had any experience with the one-way vacuum systems? None.
Because they're expensive
Are they?
as $1,000.
Well, they're from Canada.
But I have not been able to pull 28 from it at all.
Oh, like from the pump itself? Is it a diaphragm pump or is it a oil pump?
No, it's not oil.
Okay, so yeah, that we were talking about that a little bit at the beginning. The question was he's not pulling full vacuum with a diaphragm pump, and I think that's the difference. The diaphragm pump for this kind of application can't build up the right amount of vacuum, or it doesn't build up the full vacuum of the potential for your elevation, like these oil. These have a name, and I'm sorry I don't remember it. It's like oil bath or something. I don't know.
Curtis has a good,
Oh, you want to see the pump? Yeah, this is an eliminator. I'll tell you my experience with these pumps, because I've had several over the years. I had a Harbor Freight first, because we all start poor. And it did fine, but it definitely wasn't great. And then I got a Robinair, and it was awesome until I broke the handle. But that was probably more user error from dropping it. But that pump was much, much better. I have not used one of these before, this eliminator, but I know Curtis at Turntex recommends these. So I'd imagine they're probably really good if he recommends them, because he does everything really good. He likes the best stuff. So, but I know you can get these like rebuilt for a much better price. He may even sell them. So if you want, you could look at his website. But I know these are supposed to be really good. It does say economy vacuum pump, but it seemed to work really nice right here. And it's really robust in metal. Whereas the Robinair was really nice, but it was all plastic. And it just like snapped off, and I think it's gone now. We got rid of it, yeah. It was duct taped and whatever together, trying to save it.
Comment that they made.
Let's hear the comment.
They said, I think the oil change has more to do with the oil absorbing moisture, that it then sits in the pump and can ruin or corrode parts. So maybe that's
Oh,
why
okay.
it's here 'cause it's so dry.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, yeah, that comment was online, so they see it. But, yeah, we're in Arizona, so maybe we don't experience what somebody in a really humid environment might with as far as changing oil. So definitely, like, research where you are if you're not in Arizona like us. We don't really have moisture problems for the most part, so that could be a very good factor of there's moisture in the oil, and then it could mess up your pump. But
if only you had a pump saver.
well, the pump saver is more to stop the resin from getting to the oil. But yeah.
What about hemp?
Oh, so hemp. So stabilizing hemp. Stabilizing hemp is very tricky. Hemp is, if you're not sure, if you've seen a hemp blank, it looks like a piece of OSB, only thicker with like bigger chunks. And it's from the hemp plant, which is a plant, really not like a tree. It's more like a bush, I think. And they compress it together. So there's that factor that there's a lot of pieces. Plus there's probably whatever glue they use, right? So I think that's what causes the problems. It stabilizes fine typically, but a lot of times if you dry it too fast or too hot, it'll crack or warp or twist. So I think that the key is test your system. So whatever you're using for drying, do one, put a temperature, kind of like what Zach said with his recipe book. This temp at this time, see what happens. The next one, do it a little different until you find what works. With my oven, like it's real finicky. We have to jump like 25 degrees to get a couple of degrees change. So once you learn your oven and how it heats, you can probably figure it out more, but don't do a whole block of hemp at once or a bunch at once because you'll probably ruin them for a couple of rounds. So just practice, and it's more about the it's more about the curing than the vacuuming. That's pretty standard, pretty much the same as this. But definitely cure. If you know anybody that does a good job with hemp, talk to them and see what they have for advice. But it's pretty challenging just to figure out the initial formula with your curing as far as how hot and how long. But once you do, it should be fairly consistent. And it does dye well. It takes dye nicely. So you can do a lot with it.
I did a pin from your hemp blanks that I got here, and I just saturated it with thin CA. and it
Yeah.
came out good.
Mike said he got a hemp blank and just saturated it with CA. Yeah, CA works good because it does soak in and it hardens nicely without heat. So that's a good option. With hemp, though, you may want to dye it, which is cool, or even multicolor dye it. So yeah, it's worth figuring out. And people like those blanks, even though they look kind of OSB. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
Might be kind of a crazy question to ask with your prior comments. Is there any other maintenance on pumps?
The question is there any other maintenance on the pumps? Does anybody know if there's any other maintenance? I want to quiz you guys. Charles, what do you know?
Every once in a while, you have to change the front seal, but other than that,
There's a front seal. There's no filters or anything in it? No? Okay. Yeah, I think it's pretty simple. There again, though, I would look on whatever brand you get and see what they recommend, because I'm sure like from a lower quality to a better quality, there's going to be different recommendations and things. And if you're going to make an investment on a better pump, I'd definitely try to take care of it. So yeah, it sounds like seals and oil are kind of the main things. Yep. Yep. Excellent. All right. Well, that was the short version. Anything else, Amy? Do we have anyone online who wants to enter the raffle? Okay. So before I close here, if anyone online or in here hasn't seen it, we do have everything from the demos today, from Zach's, Jim's. Now, Jim's we don't really have a lot. We have CA in our segmenting material, but resins, cactus juice, dyes, all that on sale this week for the demo because we thought it's kind of like fun to have at least a little better pricing for that. We are going to give away this little chamber, and I did use it, so it's video used. I'm going to clean it off here.
So can you just let them know that if they participated in the chat already, I already put them in the
If you are on the chat and you participated, Amy has made a ticket for you, so you don't have to worry, you're already in. And if you guys liked these videos online, let us know by making a comment or something. Well, that's even better. We had somebody drive down here after they saw that we were live. All right.
here who need a ticket that didn't already get one.
Yeah, did everybody in the room get a ticket? Need one? Anyone else? You get one, Gerard? You got everyone else? Okay. All right. So if you are, this is kind of like resin casting. I always tell people, because people come in a lot and say, hey, I want a resin cast. And I'm like, what do you want to make? Because if you want to make a couple of pen blanks, it's not worth it. Buy a couple of pen blanks from a good maker and you're going to be much happier because they're really good and they've spent hours and hours and lots of money practicing. And that's what it takes to get good at this. Same thing. If you're going to do one or two blanks or you want to do a project, don't do it. It's not worth the investment in the equipment and the learning. Just have somebody that does it do it. There's a real good company in Show Low called K&G Finishing Supplies, and they do commercial stabilizing. You mail them a box of wood, they'll stabilize it, and they'll send it back to you with a bill. They're awesome. And they do stabilizing a little different. They use pressure versus vacuum, so it's a little different, but it's really good. Big in the knife and gun industry, but they can do stuff for this. But if it's something you want to do fairly regularly, or you think you're going to enjoy it, you know, get a good pot. I don't remember what these cost. I want to say they're like under $200 for the chamber. The pumps vary, but you can get the stock pot type off Amazon with a plastic lid for like $100, and it'll work for a little while. But then at some point, and I'm telling you from experience, at some point that lid is going to crack and cave in, and it is going to scare the heck out of you, because you're going to be across the room not watching it, and you're going to think a bomb went off in your thing, and there's going to be resin splattered all over the room. Because when that lid goes in and the can crushes, it's like a resin bomb. And my old building over on Chilton, you can probably still see the resin. So if you're going to do it, I understand price is a lot of issues. Make sure you make it worth your while, because if you're going to do it more than a few times, get a good piece of equipment. Because actually, good equipment nowadays is not much more than cheap equipment, and it's worth it. So Curtis makes these, so we're supporting a guy who supports us, because he does a lot of demos, he does a lot of giveaways. You can call this guy pretty much any time of night and ask him questions, but it's good stuff. So it's not like we're saying that just for that reason. It's pretty much the little best chambers you can get like this. So, all right, we got a bowl here. You want to show the bowl, Amy? Number 2. I won't look because there's names on them. Okay. Who wants it? Anyone?
Me. I do.
If you win again, it's fixed.
Yes.
You can't win twice.
I haven't won a chamber.
I got it right here. The winner is... Ooh, it's a number, no name. That means it's in the room.
Sweet.
Sorry, online folks, but at least I don't have to ship it.
4-4.
Read me your number.
No.
Go ahead. No, read me your number. 4430. Anyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, keep going, keep going.
7.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
8.
Oh!
You won it?
Dang it!
443078. Can I verify, please? No. just take my word.
I got 7-3. It's close.
And dyslexic.
Big Chad,
Yeah.
can you just let them all know in the chat again? Say how many girls participated. But
Okay.
that you were in the raffle.
Yeah, everybody, if you were in the chat chatting at all through this, Amy put your name in the bowl. So there's all these names. Dennis S., Sydney, Jody, David. You were in the drawing. Amy had you covered. She's real good. So you were in the chat. It just happened to go to somebody in the room, which is fine. So thanks everybody for watching and participating. If you guys have any questions on stabilizing, let us know. We do have videos. We do have, and this is going to sound weird, we do have Curtis's demo from last year. I'd recommend watching it because it's long, but it's very scientific. And where I'm just a guy who likes to make stuff, Curtis is a guy who likes to know why and how and when and what. And that's not me, and that's fine. I just want it to look cool when I'm done. That's all I care about. So if you want to know the technical stuff, I'd watch that video. It's actually from last February, but it's on there, and it's real good information. And then if you have any other questions, let me know, or you can always reach out to TurnTex. Sound good? Yeah. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you.